Welcome back, everyone, to Torah Today Ministries in our continuing series, Parshah Seasonings, where we bring out some of the hidden insights that come from the Hebrew and the Torah scroll of the weekly Torah portion. And this week's portion is Eikev, which covers Deuteronomy 7:12 to 11:25. We're going to begin with Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 15, and there are two things I would like to point out that come from the Hebrew of this verse. It says, "He led you through the great and awesome wilderness, with its fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty ground where there was no water, who brought you water out of the rock of flint." I want to talk to you about this phrase, great and awesome, and also about the word flint. Now, this passage is reflected over in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. In chapter 10, it says, Paul is reminding his readers, "For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were immersed into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, all ate the same spiritual food," of course that was the manna, "and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Messiah." You may not be aware of this, but in Jewish tradition and legend, the rock that Moses struck with his staff that produced water continued to produce water throughout their wilderness journey, and it rolled after them, it followed them. And obviously, Paul is embracing this legend, this story, which may very well be true. And he talks about the rock that followed them, and that rock was Messiah. Now, back in Deuteronomy, we read that this rock was made of flint. Now, the word for flint in Hebrew is the word chalamish, and you can see it right here, chalamish. But Paul says this rock is a picture of Mashiach, and there's the word Mashiach, which is Messiah, or Christos in the Greek, from which we get the word Christ. But I prefer to use the word Messiah. Now, if you notice something here, the letters that make up the word Mashiach, Mem, Shin, Yud, Chet, are also found in the word for flint. Mem, Yud, and Shin, and Chet, with an extra letter, a Lamed. So in other words, the word Mashiach is found in the Hebrew word Machalish, the Hebrew word for flint. And Paul, of course, knew that the word Messiah was in the word for flint. But what are we to make of this extra lamed right here? Well, lamed is one of those prepositional letters that when you attach it to the front of a Hebrew word, it means to or toward. So you can have the word beit, which means house, but la beit means toward the house. So here, la Mashiach, using all the letters of Kalamish, we have the phrase la Mashiach, to Messiah. In other words, everything about this flinty rock that gave them water, living water, and if Paul is correct, which I think he is, and the tradition is correct, it provided water their entire wilderness journey. Just as God provided them manna throughout the 40 years, he provided them water throughout the 40 years from this rock. And this rock, Paul says, is a picture of Messiah. He miraculously gives us the living water every single day, invites us to come and to drink from it. But now let's go back to that earlier phrase we found in our verse in Deuteronomy, where it speaks of the great and awesome wilderness. The great and awesome wilderness. And that phrase in Hebrew is Hagadol Vahanora. Gadol means big or great, and Hanora comes from the word Yara, which means terrifying, fearful, or awesome, because awe is a form of fear. And I like to use the term awesome for Nora. So he says that the wilderness is great and awesome. Well, in the Torah, there's one other thing that's called great and awesome, and only one other thing. Can you guess what it is? It's God. The wilderness was great and awesome, but our God is also great and awesome. In other words, as you go through the wilderness period of your life, and we all go through a wilderness period, God is in the wilderness. That wilderness period is God's presence. It's God's program. He's with us every step of the way. And the purpose of the wilderness is to prepare us to be a spiritual people, a people who are ready to step across into the spiritual life, the fruitful life represented by the promised land, the land of Canaan. And all the things we fear might happen to us in that land will become realities in the wilderness. And in the wilderness, it's a place where we learn to die, because that's what they spent 40 years doing. They spent 40 years just dying. That older generation had to die. And the young generation had to grow up and take its place. That's the story of every wilderness you or I will ever go through. The old me has to go. The new me that God's preparing to step into the life of spiritual fruitfulness, that has to grow up. As John the Immerser said, I must decrease and he must increase. But the place where it says that God is great and awesome, it adds a third adjective in there. Let's take a look at it. It's Deuteronomy 10:17. And it says there, which is also part of our Torah portion, and it says there, for Adonai your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God, who is not partial and takes no bribe. So here we have our Hagadol, just like we had in the previous phrase. And over here we have Vahanora, the awesome, but here in the middle, and I put it in bold, is Vahagibor. Gibor means mighty, powerful. The wilderness was great and awesome, and God is great and awesome. But if they're both great and awesome, then how can one have victory over the other? How can one supersede the other? Well, God has something the wilderness doesn't have. The wilderness might be great, might be huge, and it might be really scary, but it has no might, it has no power. But our God is Hagadol, Vahagibor, Vahanora. He is a mighty God. That's why, no matter how big and scary our wilderness may seem, our God is also big, and he's awesome, and he is mighty. That's why in the wilderness, he can bring us through. The wilderness will not conquer us, but through God we will conquer the wilderness. It will have its desired effect in our lives, but we come out the winners. It's a beautiful insight. So, just the bottom line for me is that whatever wilderness you're going through, it is an aspect of God himself, great and awesome. But he also is mighty. He'll bring you through. There's no shortcuts through the wilderness. You can't make your wilderness journey and your wilderness experience any shorter, but you can sure delay it and lengthen it, which is exactly what the Israelites did. It was only an 11-day journey from Mount Sinai to the shore of the Jordan River. 11 days. And they managed to stretch it out into 40 years. So, again, you have to go through the wilderness. But how long you spend there is kind of up to you, up to me. I'm going to go on to another section of our Torah portion, and that's in chapter 9, verse 26. It starts a little way into verse 26 and goes through verse 29. And this is Moses' prayer for the people of Israel. Now remember, the entire book of Deuteronomy, which comes from the Greek words ditto namas. Ditto is like ditto marks, it means you repeat something. Namas is the Greek word for law, so it's like the second law, which is a horrible name for the book. In Hebrew it's called devarim, which means words, God's words. But in the book, the entire book is Moses speaking and reviewing the last 40 years of what God has done with Israelites, from bringing them out of Egypt to their experiences in the wilderness and how he's going to bring them across, and then what to do when they do get across. And then it ends with Moses blessing the 12 tribes of Israel. So in this portion, in chapter 9, he's reviewing the prayer of when he interceded for Israel before God. Because remember, after their great sin of the golden calf, God indicated he was ready to destroy them and start over. But Moses, like Messiah, intercedes, and God heard Moses' prayer. And so Moses once again gives us the prayer that he prayed. Now I have it in here in Hebrew so that you can count the words. And if you count the words, you will discover that there are exactly 58 words in this prayer. Why is that significant? Significant because that is the numerical value of the Hebrew word chen, which is the Hebrew word for grace. Grace. So even in the number of words recorded of Moses' prayer, we see it's a prayer of grace. God, be gracious to your people. Forgive them. Overlook their sin. Be patient with them. And God heard Moses' prayer. I think he was really proud of Moses for praying that prayer. That's what he delighted and desired for Moses to pray. And by the way, just a little detail. You take the word chen, grace, and you spell it in reverse. Instead of chet nun, you spell it nun chet. It spells Noach, which is the name Noah. And as you know, Noah found chen, grace, in the eyes of Adonai. So, and Noach, his name means rest. So a person who's really discovered chen, grace, also discovers Noach, rest, real rest. Okay, that didn't cost any extra. I threw that in. Now, this last thing I want to share is not really what you might call a Torah seasoning. It's nothing hidden. But I'm amazed at how many people I talk to are shocked to discover this, which is right there on the surface. In any translation of the Bible, it's right there, but for some reason, it seems hidden from our eyes. People just don't see it, don't notice it. And it is this, it's the fact that there were 2 arks. You heard me right, there were 2 arks. I'm not talking about Noah's Ark, I'm talking about the Ark of the Covenant. There were 2 arks. There's the ark you read about in Exodus that God commissioned Bezalel and Aholiab to build, and the lid was out of solid gold with the 2 cherubim coming up and covering the lid. And then the box itself was made out of wood, and it was covered inside and outside with gold. And then there were rings with staves that went through that were also covered with gold. And this is the ark that was in the Holy of Holies. But there was a second ark, and you read about it in our Torah portion. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 1 through 5. So let me read it to you. This is what it says. At that time, Adonai said to me, cut for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first and come up to me on the mountain. And this again is after the sin of the golden calf. Moses had been up for 40 days and 40 nights. So God says, come back up, but you need to cut out the stones yourself this time. I'll ride on them, but you cut out the stones this time around. And he says, and come up to me on the mountain and make an ark of wood. And I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets that you broke, and you shall put them in the ark. So I made an ark of acacia wood. It's not covered with gold, doesn't have a gold lid. There are no cherubim on it. This is an ark that Moses made, not Bezalel, not Aholiab. And he says, I cut 2 tablets of stone like the first, and went up the mountain with the 2 tablets in my hand. And he, God, wrote on the tablets in the same writing as before, the 10 commandments that Adonai had spoken to you on the mountain out of the midst of the fire on the day of the assembly. And Adonai gave them to me. Then I turned and came down from the mountain and put the tablets in the ark that I had made. And there they are, as Adonai commanded me. So this helps answer a question. When you read about the Israelites and the order of march as they would progress through the wilderness from camp to camp, there were two of the encampments that went in the front and two behind, and in the middle were the Levites carrying the ark. And yet the Torah tells us that the ark went ahead of them to search out a place to encamp. Well, how can the ark be in the midst of them and the ark be out in front looking for a place to encamp? Well, this solves the problem. The ark that Moses made, and which tradition teaches us, is that after the Ark of the Covenant was made, these two stone tablets are transferred to it. But the broken pieces were put into the wooden ark that Moses made. Now, I can't say for sure that that's the case, but that is what is believed in Jewish tradition, and it simply does fit the text. So the wooden ark that Moses made with the broken pieces went out first. This humble little wooden ark, I don't know what kind of craftsman Moses was, but it went out first, searching ahead. And then when it found a place, the people would come up, bearing the Ark of the Covenant, and they would establish and rebuild the tabernacle and put the ark where it belongs. So I just think it's interesting, and most people aren't aware of this, but it gives you something to think about. And if you really think about this, the two sets of tablets, the broken ones and the whole ones, and the two arks, the plain wooden one and then the golden one that went in the Holy of Holies, they represent the two appearances of Yeshua, our Messiah. His first coming, when he was broken, and then his second coming, when he's brought in with great fanfare and with the glory that he deserves. So anyways, just want to leave you with that thought. So until next time, I wish you shalom and may God bless.
Until next time.